Welcome to the Thank You Life podcast. Today's guest is Laura Dawn, entrepreneur, educator, coach, and host of the Dear Humanity podcast. In this conversation, Laura and Kevin get into quite a range of different topics, largely related to psychedelics. They even zoom out and look at the macro experience of humanity right now, as the prophecies and all these ancient cultures would say, this is the time of the great turning. This is a major shifting point in humanity. And like Laura says, all signs point to this moment in time right now. And what that means for all of us and how psychedelics could potentially have a major role to play in this shift, in this new paradigm that's being established of what it means to be a human on planet Earth. And something interesting they talk about is this concept of framing the psychedelic experience, both in the words that we use to describe the medicines themselves, like how hallucinogens would immediately make somebody think that their experience isn't real. It's just a hallucination. I can write it off. There's no wisdom to be gleaned from it. Versus entheogen, psychedelic, ecodelic, these other words that are more empowering and they have more of a validation to them. And how expectation can flavor the experience itself. Now we have all these resources like How to Change Your Mind and more podcasts talking about the psychedelic experience. And what impact does that have on somebody who's just entering into this work? They have all these expectations about what the experience should be like. And it's just an interesting topic of conversation. They also look at psychedelics, yes, and their healing potential. And, Thank You Life, that's what we do. We help people heal through psychedelic therapy. Though there's a point with psychedelics where they become more exploratory tools and learning tools, creativity tools. And Laura talks a lot about that and how the psychedelic state is a skill set to navigate, just like being good at learning, just like developing more creativity and the potential that these medicines have beyond just healing, which is, largely the conversation right now in the zeitgeist is how can we use these for healing? Because there is so much mental health struggle right now and trauma across the board. Though it's something that's quite interesting to our team too. How can these medicines be used even when somebody isn't seeking healing necessarily, but more in the kind of self-actualization and exploratory mindset. Yeah, just such an interesting conversation all the way around. And they discuss how, one's perception affects the experience of reality that you have. Perception changes your reality, and brings to mind one of my favorite Ram Dass talks that he gave was all centered around this concept of everywhere you look, you see what you're looking for, and how a perception shift can legitimately move somebody into a new reality, and how these medicines can so quickly do that for people. And then with structured integration and a mindful approach to this work, they can really implement that and have it stick. We hope you enjoy this episode. Laura is brilliant, and it's just a really stimulating, thought-provoking conversation about where we are right now as a human race and where we're moving in the next 5, 10, 20 years at this great turning point in humanity's history. So if you like this podcast, please do give us a 5-star rating on any platform that you're listening. And if you want to inquire about how to get involved with Thank You Life, visit our website, thankyoulife.org. And one last thing to mention is that Laura has a 7-month training program coming up called Transilience. It starts on January 24th. So if you're listening to this before then, there is still time to enroll. You can visit lauradawn.co/Transilience. It's a 7-month advanced psychedelic integration training for coaches, therapists, guides, and microdosing mentors. And she calls it a codex for human flourishing. They get a lot into the skill set of being creative and creative cognition, and how these medicines, when used in the way that she's laying it out, can be helpful beyond just healing, and how they can really help us become more creative and become our more empowered selves ultimately. So again, that's lauradawn.co/Transilience. If you're interested in that, program begins January 24th. We hope you enjoy this episode conversation with Laura Dawn.
Thank You Life is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that was started by myself and Dr. Dan Engel in 2022 as a financial assistance fund for psychedelic therapy. Psychedelic therapy is expensive, and 95% of the U.S. population cannot afford its costs. That's where we come in. We partner with over 100 ketamine clinics throughout the U.S. to help clients who cannot afford this treatment. In 2024 alone, we gave over $250,000 away to help 115 people receive this life-changing treatment. This work is not cheap, and it is life-changing. If you feel inspired to give or to become a monthly donor to help more individuals access this treatment, please visit thankyoulife.org/donate or email our Director of Philanthropy, Meredith Thomas, at meredith@thankyoulife.org. Every bit counts, and small monthly donations are especially important to keep this work moving forward. If you can give even $10 to $25 a month, you will join our community of contributors who are changing the lives of so many. Thank you all for your support. This episode of the Thank You Life podcast is proudly supported by Enthea, a mental health company dedicated to providing access to safe and affordable psychedelic-assisted therapy. Like us at Thank You Life, Enthea is committed to removing health equity obstacles that impede access to impactful mental health care. Enthea is a third-party administrator specializing in innovative mental health benefits for employers, including access to ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. As the first and only provider of advanced mental health solutions for the workplace, they enable companies to expand their benefits to include breakthrough therapies that address root causes of mental health challenges. Visit enthea.com to learn more. And now, back to the show. Okay. Hi, Laura Dawn.
Hi, Kevin. It's great to see you. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, thanks so much for doing this. And I'm curious if just the first place to start is for you to share about what's up with you at the moment. And if you want to share a little bit about Transilience, the facilitator training that you've got going on.
Yeah, well, I actually just hopped off this live webinar that I hosted. It was a free webinar. And if you've never joined me for one of the webinars that I like to do on occasion, it's always a fun deep dive into a larger macro narrative of some of the changes that I'm tracking. And I always get such great feedback, and it's always just such a joy to drop in with the community in that way. And the webinar was titled The Intelligence Age Meets the Wisdom Economy: How to Navigate AI Disruption with Psychedelics by Fostering Transilience, which is a mouthful, I know.
Sure.
But I think it's really important to actually presence some of the major changes that we are witnessing right now. We're witnessing we could look at it through the lens of economy, to, prophecy, the Hopi prophecy, the Kogi prophecy that says the ending will fall into the new beginning in 2026, or the eagle and condor prophecy, or, books titled The Fourth Turning, or if we look at it through an economic lens, like Ray Dalio calls this like the changing world order, or if we look to elders like Joanna Macy, who calls this the Great Turning. Everywhere we look, it's pointing to this particular moment in time. And we're witnessing two very large super cycles that are happening. Thomas Friedman talks about this, which is super interesting if you're not familiar with his work. We're in a technological super cycle, quite obviously, and we're in a climate super cycle, and they're converging and they're happening together. And even just what happened in tech just in the past 10 days is pretty eye-opening and telling in terms of what this next decade is going to look like. And I'll just name a couple of things.
Please.
Just in terms of, we're well on our way. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, and if you don't know that name, you've certainly been tuning out, which I think is a strategy that a lot of people I know are using, because it's just already too overwhelming and we haven't seen anything yet in terms of like accelerating change. But Sam Altman recently posted on his blog, he said, we are likely to see AI super intelligence within a few thousand days. And I thought that framing of a few thousand days is really interesting. I'm like, okay, that kind of makes you think like in terms of years. And, we have AI narrow intelligence, and then it's going towards AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is like the big thing that everyone's worried about. And then we're going towards, artificial super intelligence, which is defined as like being far surpassing human intelligence. And, there's this huge race for AI agents. Mark Zuckerberg says that soon there will be more AI agents than there are people on the planet. And if you haven't seen what AI agents are already doing, it's mind-blowing. And it's just the bare minimum, like the baseline starting point. And I'll include and I'll send over to you, Kevin, a link to this replay of the webinar, because I also include a bunch of resources to tune into, because I think it's important to track some of these these transitions that are happening right now. And one of the videos is just it's just a Chrome extension that's an AI agent that you can just give instructions to, and it will go into your computer, open your Gmail, answer their emails the way you want it to, and then it will like go into Uber Eats, order the pizza that you like with your credit card. It's starting to cross across different systems and functions. And that is a step towards artificial general intelligence. And if you haven't seen, when I saw that video, I was like, right. Okay. So now I'm starting to get just like the magnitude of what is coming in the pipeline and why Sam Altman is saying that. And then, so there's, the whole race towards AI agents, which is like already happening. And then just this week, Google had a huge breakthrough in quantum computing.
Yes.
Huge breakthrough. So for people listening, try to imagine this many years in your mind. 10 with 25 zeros after the 10. So it's called 10 septillion years. Okay, so imagine 10 and then 25 zeros following the 10. That's 10 septillion years. What used to take that long, just previously, before the Willow chip, what took 10 septillion years to compute, the Willow chip can now compute in 5 minutes. That just happened this week. And so if we're not cluing into the macro, because the macro informs the micro, what's happening in our daily lives, we just need to get ready for the kind of, we're going through a rite of passage. That is what's happening right now. And very simply put, all of the systems, the models, the economic models, the institutions, they were just designed for a different time. And they're designed from a starting point of disconnection, and they're not aligned with life. And if you haven't been cluing into the Stockholm Report, for example, which is really incredible work being done by, his last name is escaping me right now, but I'll pull it up just to get it right.
The Stockholm Report, you said?
Yeah, the Stockholm Report, Johan Rockström. Basically, and I'll send you these resources because it's really important to clue into, especially Johan's recent TED Talk that he just did. Like, urgently watch that TED Talk. It came out. He's been doing this work for 15 years, and he led a team of scientists. And for the first time, they mapped all the planetary boundaries. And there's 9 planetary boundaries, and we've already crossed 6 of those thresholds. And these are like the lifelines of the planet, right? And right now there's a lot of talk about like the collapsing of the AMOC, which is, the currents in the ocean. And soon I think we're going to be in a radically different reality. And if you're not prepared for the kind of rite of passage that we are moving through as a humanity, that I think it's incredibly important for us to be thinking about how to prepare ourselves for something like that. And this is a really long-winded answer to Transilience, but going back in my own journey, I mean, there's so much I can share. But in 2018, I went through my own cataclysmic life quake. I had built a volcanic retreat center on the Big Island of Hawaii, and the volcano erupted and lava was flowing less than a mile from our property, our homestead.
Most of it in Hilo.
Yeah, it was in Pahoa. We had a volcanic hot spring retreat center. It was such a beautiful place. And it was just like the deep love of my life and my medicine gardens and, everything. And that put me into an incredible dark night of the soul for multiple years. And I can see very clearly that was preparing me for the work that I'm doing. And even at that point in 2018, I had already been doing very deep medicine work for, well over a decade. I've been journeying with medicines for 25 years, but I would say like the past 15 years have been like really within a deep practice. That going through that liminal space, and that's what psychedelics prepare you for, right? They are a rite of passage where you go through liminality and where we really face, the big questions. Who am I? Identity, looking at what we value, how we live our lives. And it can be an extremely rude awakening if you've been living in a way that is out of alignment. And we're moving through that on a collective level. And very soon, I see already in the work that I'm doing, more and more leaders and organizations are reaching out to me around psychedelic training because it's of huge interest. I think that if we keep working with medicines within a specific framework, and this is something that we can talk about, because right now mostly everyone's talking about psychedelics within a medicalized lens, and that's still under a reductionistic, disconnected model. But if we can transition, and that's what Transilience is really all about, it's how do we hold space for psychedelic transformation within the scaffolding and the framework that supports human flourishing and alignment with life, looking at creativity, adaptability, connection, meaning, purpose, the dimensions of what human flourishing really looks like, then I think we will eventually get to a point where it will become undoubtedly clear that psychedelics will prove to be the most effective tools we have to support transition resilience, which is what Transilience is all about.
Well said. There's so much here. There's a couple various points that I'll make. I think psychedelics, I've seen it through the lens of like preparing us for death. And yet I think also preparing us for like a really big collective transition or transformation is equally important. I remember somebody sharing this sort of dream they had when I was on an ayahuasca farm, and it was about like basically everybody was just like on the floor, kind of in the fetal position, kind of shaking. And then one by one, somebody would kind of sit up and, I mean, essentially find like nervous system regulation within all of that and just kind of wake up out of the nightmare, so to speak. And I feel like what my hope is that there's enough of us who've been doing this work long enough that there is like a body of resiliency that exists when something really big like that happens. The other things I'll say is I've been tracking a lot of different prophecies, and then also more recently the fourth turning. I'm usually the one that brings that up, so anytime somebody else brings that up to me, I'm like, ooh, yes. So the fourth turning has been a great lens for me to look through where we're at in this moment right here. And just for some context for people, it was a book written by a sociologist, Neil Howe, and it really tracks specifically like Anglo-American, kind of all the way back to England society, and these different turnings, generational turnings that society goes through. And there's 4 different ones that last 80 to 100 years that kind of make up the length of a human life. And this fourth turning he describes as like a civic crisis. And basically, I'll just say this, like, the last 3 of those before the one that we're currently in were the American Revolution, the American Civil War, and then the Great Depression through World War II. Obviously, this kind of major global war, or not necessarily global war, but major war sort of periods. So yeah, anyway, for me, that's been an extremely helpful lens to understand where we're at, which, he talks about the financial collapse of 2008 being the beginning of what we're currently in, and going to potentially like the early 30s. So we're, really in the thick of it. And I think this is such a unique one because of the globalization of society, the technology increases, and then this intersection to me of like, AI, nuclear weapons, psychedelics, potentially ET phenomena. There's just so many things kind of converging at this point. And then to go back to also what you were saying is like, it's also this converging now of these different, more like indigenous prophecy pieces. So I didn't look a ton up about you because I like to really come in fresh with these things. But the little bit I did was you and I think one of your mentors or teachers sharing about the 11th hour Hopi prophecy, which is one of my favorite kind of pieces of inspiration. I've shared it with our Thank You Life team a few times, and it was something that would be read. I did a decent amount of medicine on Maui for about 5 years, and kind of right after the water prayer, very deep into the night, somebody would read that prophecy, and it always just kind of shook me.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's like a big
Hmm.
long-winded response. My kind of curiosity is like, on one hand, how did you kind of get into the prophecy pieces, and what do you think about the kind of like overlaying of these, more kind of ancient or indigenous prophecies with, something like the fourth turning, which is more this like sociological kind of framework?
Well, they're really all signs are just pointing to this moment in time.
Yeah.
And I've been what I'm now using this term educator entrepreneur because that's really the essence of what I've been doing for my entire adult life is writing curriculum, transformational curriculum to support people on the journey of change. And I've been running programs for many years and I'm trying to think about the first program that I read. Now it's become a ritual. I always read the Hopi prophecy at the beginning of every program, but even like 10 years ago, I was opening with that prophecy, the Hopi prophecy in particular, because it offers us profound instruction for this time. And I've read that prophecy and studied it deeply for many, many years. And every time I read it or, think about it, or there'll be a new moment where I'll be like, again, it's like revealed, there's layers of instruction there. And then a few years ago, one of my mentors or, elders, grandmother Jyoti, she had a vision of me joining her on a very special mission to Colombia to go meet with the Mamos and the Kogis. And so I accompanied her and a council of indigenous elders to receive messages and teachings and transmissions from Mamos who were on the mountain, who have really never come down to like have contact with Western civilization. They're the elder brothers of humanity. And they also carry, the first 5 mass extinction stories. They are like a complete unbroken lineage since the beginning of time. And they are incredibly fascinating and deeply wise and connected. They're tuned into a completely different reality. When a Kogi is born and they're chosen as a mamo, that baby goes into complete darkness for usually at least 9 years. So no light. Complete darkness. I met a mamo that was in the darkness for 21 years. You tap into you see a different dimension of reality with that kind of training. And one of the things that grandmother Jyoti offers, and I feel like these are really powerful words of instruction for how to navigate this time, in addition to following and listening to the original principles, which is really just about how do we live in right relationship with ourselves, with each other, and with this earth. That's the highest calling right now. And Jyoti Ma says, it's important to pay attention to the breakdown so that you stay informed and aware, but pay more attention to that which is breaking through because a new dawn is rising. And I feel that really, and I hear her voice in my ear every day saying that because right now is advanced game of attention management. And what you are attuning to with your awareness is going to have a huge impact in the outcomes of your life in the decades to come. And that's why I do these webinars where I'm tuning in and I'm synthesizing, I'm creating a helpful narrative for people to understand, make meaning of this very confusing time that is rife with division and separation. And one of the things I think it's really important is to cultivate our capacity for metacognitive awareness, to not get so absorbed in the storyline of this is. And so it's like when I get on this webinar, I'm like, I'm not here to say whether I believe AI is good or bad. It's an amplification of everything is possible more than ever before. Amplification of possibility, great promise, extraordinary peril. We will see incredible breakthroughs. There's no doubt about it. I mean, even the willow chip is in and of itself an extraordinary feat of human consciousness. And with that, there is so much peril and misalignment of values, human values. And when it's held within a construct of, environmental extraction and degradation and disconnection and greed and power, I think we're in for a ride. How can we not be? And just as, and it's so interesting to watch like these incredible parallels. Like in the amplification of AI, there's a deep call to wake up our ancient intelligence, the OG AI, right?
You're listening to the Thank You Life podcast because you're interested in hearing inspiring stories about people's personal growth, transformation, and healing with psychedelics. And that's awesome because those stories are really powerful and they deserve to be heard. But if you are anything like me, you are also interested in what's happening out in the world to make these substances, these medicines, more accessible and available to everyone. So my name is Henry Winslow, and I created a free email newsletter called Tricycle Day that helps you do just that. Every week, I send 2 issues that take about 5 minutes to read, so not a huge time commitment at all, but they'll get you caught up on what's happening in psychedelic research, policy reform, and this emerging industry that's unfolding in real time. So if that sounds like something you would like to check out, just go to tricycleday.com, and there you can enter your email and you'll be good to go. So with that said, I'm super happy to be supporting Thank You Life, and let's get back to the podcast.
This episode of the Thank You Life podcast is proudly supported by Dr. Bronner's, a brand that believes in more than just making great soap. As a dedicated corporate sponsor of Thank You Life, Dr. Bronner's is helping us break down barriers to mental health care, advancing our mission to providing life-changing access to psychedelic therapy for those in need. Together, we're making healing possible for underserved communities across the country. So next time you see that iconic bottle on the shelf, know that Dr. Bronner's isn't just providing that refreshing shower. They're also invested in improving access to mental health care for everyone. Thank you, Dr. Bronner's, for being a true partner in healing. Visit drbronner's.com to learn more. Now back to the show.
And that plant medicines are coming into the mainstream more quickly than ever before. I don't think it's a coincidence. And as Dennis McKenna said on a conversation that I had with him for the Psychedelic Leadership podcast, before I renamed it to Dear Humanity, he said that psychedelics and sacred plant medicines are the neurotransmitters of the Gaian mind telling us to wake up. And I feel that. And I've known that ever since my first high dose psilocybin when I was 14 years old. I got that message. And that's why I've been on this path for over 25 years doing this work. And the very first journey I had, the thought I had to myself was, people are going to need help navigating this. This is a lot. This is a lot. And I was that kind of wise soul as a kid, you know, but I do think that, just to finish my point, and then I'll let you take this wherever you want to go. Same with psychedelics. They are incredibly powerful tools. We might call them a biotechnology or a psychotechnology. And we're also witnessing an amplification of both promise and peril in the psychedelic space. Like, to the T, that is exactly what's happening. We are witnessing huge breakthroughs of healing and transformation. And we're also witnessing an amplification of more trauma because there is such a lack of how to hold these incredibly powerful tools. And I always like to remind people neuroplasticity is neutral. It's not necessarily net positive. You're reopening critical periods. You are incredibly susceptible. You're incredibly malleable. And that can be extremely beneficial, or it can lead to more trauma, which is something that I'm witnessing at an enormously alarming rate right now. The amount of people who are coming out of ceremony, who are going through extremely challenging months and years because they don't know how to make sense of it. They don't have the support. It wasn't held in a good way, all of it. And so it's the same. It's like the more powerful the tool, the higher the risk, the higher the reward, and the greater the responsibility.
Man, again, so many different directions that we can go with this. I'm curious, when you had that experience at 14 and you said something like about people are going to need help in how to hold this. Were you speaking about psychedelic experience or kind of what's coming in terms of like global transformation, or both?
Both, but mostly I was really feeling the like more of this psychedelic experience, because at that point in my teenage years, I was struggling with depression and addiction. And so that's actually my background. I did a lot of work in that space. And just the amount of what blew open for me in that journey was so significant. I mean, it changed the course of my life, and it was a complete divine intervention. I have no doubt or question about that. But looking up, I'll never forget that moment of looking up at the vast cosmos and realizing both the extreme elation and also extreme, desolation of this is so significant and also completely insignificant. Right. And like holding that paradox as a child really informed my life path. It's why I decided to really study Tibetan Buddhism for the majority of my life, because so far I have yet to come across any body of wisdom that helps us make sense of these altered states of consciousness as effectively as Eastern philosophy does.
Yeah, and I can attest to that too. And I had my own kind of experience with that where like at 22, kind of, I went to the jungle, volunteered at an ayahuasca retreat center, and really kind of, it was very lonely and super difficult. And I had been really loving reading about a lot of different spirituality, but this was like really kind of throwing me into the fire, so to speak. Like 3 months into that, I went and did my first Vipassana. It was like this. Now I have like a technique that can ground me into something that I can keep returning to, regardless of what's going on. And that has carried me through all my medicine journeys since then. And yeah, and I feel like they just fit together so well. Would you share a little bit about like what was happening before that experience at 14 with, with addiction and just what that was like for you?
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in Montreal. I was raised as an athlete. That was like my first identity construct. I was the youngest of 4 kids, and I came into this world, to use Eckhart Tolle's language, with a really intense pain body. And I remember, training as a kid was like my primary focus. And that was the only rule in our house, is that if you were living under my parents' roof, you had to be competing in training in a sport. And I started with gymnastics until I was told that I got too big, and they were like, you should go to diving. So then I got too tall, I was like not as petite as all the other girls. And so I started training in diving. And one of my earliest memories actually was jumping off the 3-meter diving board, and my dad holding me under my armpits and throwing me into the water, into the deep end, and like teaching me how to swim. All of my early memories have been like water-based memories. And as a kid, I was also what I felt like was a prophetic dreamer. I had a very incredibly blurred line between dream states and reality. And oftentimes as a kid, I'd have to like check in with somebody and be like, did that happen? Or was that a dream? And I felt like the time in elementary school, I just felt like this is not for me. This is not my path. Like, this is such a waste of time. I don't belong here. I never felt like I fit in. I had a really severe creativity trauma when I was in grade 3, where my teacher like proclaimed to the whole school the whole class that I would never be creative because I couldn't draw. And Brene Brown has done a lot of research on that, showing just how many kids have had like creativity related negative beliefs instilled in them based on like old paradigms of creativity, which is ironic that I went and received a Master of Science in Creativity Studies and Change Leadership, which is a big part of the work that I do.
Nice little fuck you to the teacher.
Right. Totally. I've had a lot of that as a kid, but I felt very deeply that I wasn't like the conventional path was not for me. And I also played water polo for many years. And then my whole life was like training before school, going to school, training after school, competing on weekends, flying around different like competitions. And then I started training in water polo. And then I went to like my first rave. I did mushrooms a few times, and that was really life-changing. And then I was like, teenager peak rave scene in Montreal. Like, that was an era. And when I meet other people who were there in that era, it's like they totally know it was such a distinct moment in time. And that really shaped me. And I told my parents at one point, and my parents have always been super supportive of me. I just said, it was about grade 8. I said I didn't want to go to school anymore. And my mom was like, what do you need? How can I help you? You have to graduate. And so I got a tutor, And I basically replaced an entire week of school with just one day of tutoring for my classes, because that's how much a waste of time school was. Like, I'd go to class and the teacher would be like yelling at Brent, throwing shit out the window. And I'd just be like, I'm so like, what am I doing here? And so in high school, at a very young age, I got my license. I had my own Toyota Corolla as soon as the day I turned 15. And I just wanted freedom in my life. And I had a lot of freedom. And at that point, I didn't have to go to school. And I remember it would be like a Wednesday night and I'd be doing like high dose psilocybin journeys at a friend's house and learning how to navigate those realms. And it would profoundly shape my path. Absolutely.
Yeah, and so young to be getting into it in such a deep way. I'm curious if you can share anything that feels interesting to share about some of those early journeys.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much that I could share. One thing, looking back, having this kind of depth of perspective and the work that I've developed, this body of work that I've developed over so many years, is really seeing just how much the context and support and how we enter into these relationships with these medicines is so important. And my early experiences were very much cluing into the fact that there were different dimensions of reality, and that I would like pop out of my body and be somewhere else. And then I'd pop back into this reality and be like, whoa, what just happened? And I had a lot of like cathartic experiences as in those early years. It wasn't like a straight line trajectory. It wasn't like, oh, I started doing psychedelics and then my healing, like no depression or no addiction. I was still, experimenting with other drugs and going to raves and, exploring amphetamines, which I think was probably like the biggest damage that happened for me. But I was really just open to, it was sort of like entering my dream states again, but with more control. And it was just really fascinating for me. Yeah, but I was still kind of getting into all sorts of trouble and, and still struggling with different forms of addiction and eating disorders and just really figuring it out. And, young people today, we really, really lack supportive rites of passage for people in a way that helps people enter adulthood in a way that makes meaning and sense out of this time that we're living in. And I feel really concerned about children and young people coming up in the world today.
Yeah, my sense is that all of the drive toward what, a lot of kids at that age do, whether it was your experience or even just like to go toward drinking or, more risky driving, all of that kind of stuff. I feel like it's just teenagers yelling out for a rite of passage and something meaningful, something fucking meaningful for themselves. My guess here, and I'm curious how you would describe all this, is that there was not a lot of integration happening, so to speak, but tons of just kind of like opening up to the possibilities of reality, like kind of what is all this? It sounds like a lot of expansion. And yeah, I mean, I'm curious like what that was like to hold at such a young age.
It's interesting. I haven't really thought about it that much lately, in terms of, but it's true. It's like, this is one of the things that I was talking about in this webinar that I just did. And I've, for people who are familiar with my work, that this is something I talk about a lot because, even when we just look at history, for example, in the 60s, we called these psychedelics psychotomimetics. And we were like, here, take this thing. It's going to induce a psychotic break. And like, and it really did. And we experienced a lot of people having those experiences and we put them in hospitals under fluorescent lighting. And then it was like, oh my God, these are powerful entheogens. And now they can teach you how to come to know God. And they did, because that's what we imbued it with. And then we put people in churches and having deeply mystical experiences. And that was really valuable. And then we said like, oh, well, they're just hallucinogens. And then when we hold that frame, well, it's very different in terms of how we integrate and how we relate to material that comes up in the journey. Think about it as an entheogen versus a hallucinogen. An entheogen is like, wow, I received a divinely guided image that is informing and illuminating my path forward, versus that was just some weird fucking hallucination that I can't even make sense of. So it actually, like, the framing of it. So it was really interesting over the years, I mean, even in my 20s, and I'm 41 almost, in just like a couple of weeks, I'm turning 41. So I'm well underway in my 40th, fourth decade of my life. But it is interesting to look back and see the lack of context and how that informed the experiences. And in some ways, I'm really grateful for that. I don't envy all of the people reading Michael Pollan's book and going to have their first psilocybin journey at some fucking retreat center. I don't. There's so much pre-imprinting there. And at that time, so like even to go further back, my oldest brother, and I'm sure he would just cringe at this, he was 10 years older than me. And so like the earliest memories I had would my brother, like he would go traveling in British Columbia, and I was just such a young kid at that time, and he would tell me these stories about, I ate these magical mushrooms and I was in a canoe and there was these giant frogs, and I was like, 9 years old being like, wow, this is so cool. I think that was the only priming I ever had, and so my experiences were really just a direct experience, and I'm actually really grateful for that. It was a different time. I think about Albert Hoffman, like his first LSD trip, it's like direct contact with that kind of reality. And now I think we have a lot of baggage that we're, gotta prepare people with all, and like shed the baggage, prepare them with the right tools and all of it. And I think it's good, net positive, ultimately. But I do see a lot of people coming in with just a lot of expectation, and that informs their experience of it.
Yeah. In some ways, I appreciate the orienting toward healing, and especially with how expensive these things are, a lot of people come into these as like, I'm paying a lot of money that I can barely afford, and like this better fucking work, because if it doesn't, I don't know what else to do. And that's just a lot of pressure all around.
Right.
For themselves especially.
Yeah, which is why I don't think that model is the best model, actually.
Yeah.
I think teaching yourself how to cultivate a practice is the best investment that you can make, because in extreme scenarios, I do think the therapy model is a decent model. And I'm actually witnessing a lot of therapists and doctors give up their licensing so that they could do more of this work outside of that, because they know firsthand that that is not the best, most holistic way to hold this. And so I do think in certain severe cases, and medical supervision with coming off of SSRIs, all of that, medications, there's been a number of deaths recently in the Iboga space. Iboga is no joke. It really depends on what medicine we're talking about here. But for the average person, I think, considering the fact that people have been tripping balls for millennia, and we got here probably because of that we can actually encourage people to cultivate a practice and give them the tools to have a direct experience without having to pay so much money for a therapy session with psilocybin. And that's just my personal perspective on that. And to actually take it one step further, I love that now we're starting to talk about ecodelics, and we're starting to talk about, Thomas Roberts, he coined ideagens. That was a lot of the work I did in graduate school, was psychedelic science, creative cognition, and change leadership. And I think the names that we give them matter, because it informs the framing of them, right? And so when we are aiming for the healing of depression, that's a frame. There's a lot of hidden assumptions there. And that's the primary frame we're working with. How to heal addiction, how to heal depression. The medical model is geared towards bringing people up to a baseline of normal, right? And I'm not interested in that, because it's the context of what we're holding it in is a dysfunctional culture rooted in disconnection, and all of our sources of problems stem from that disconnection. So we need a different framing and a different context, and the scaffolding, the naming of it, how we set people up, it matters more than we realize. And that was the examples that I was running through with, psychotomimetic or entheogen or hallucinogen. I'm really interested, most importantly, on like like the larger framing that I'm talking about is Transilience, which is about human flourishing, but it's really looking at ecodelics, nature connectedness, creativity, creative cognition, ideogens, inspirogens, and it's looking at adaptability and resiliency as a primary frame. And I think that to me feels really interesting and probably the most important conversation that we can be having, all held within wisdom, the cultivation of wisdom. And I think we need wisdom now more than ever before, especially with AI. Intelligence is one thing, but like intelligence without any wisdom is dangerous. And not just wisdom, but also held within a relational understanding that we are embedded in this ecosystem. And I think that I have spent almost 2 decades of my life living outside. It has changed me profoundly. There's not a coincidence that, we call these ecodelics now, and I journeyed for 25 years and I've been living outside for 20 years without any screen. I've had little stints in different parts of the world inside, and that contrast was very informative too. But the better part of my journey has been living open air living without walls or screens. And it has fundamentally changed my perception of reality. And I don't think many people have that kind of wiring, because that took something to change the neurological connections in my brain to understand my connection to and my relationship to my environment and to nature. It took a long time, actually. And that's one of the things I worry about and I'm concerned about in terms of like how rapidly we need to change our relationship to the environment right now. It took a long time. Like, I'll give you an example. For a big part of that time, I was completely off grid. I relied on water catchment for my water and solar for all of our power needs. Before we got water and solar, I was pooping in the woods and, collecting water and dumping cold buckets of water on my head while I was building the retreat center. That was all off grid. When we had water catchment, you become profoundly aware of your attention is attuned to the elements around you. You are incredibly aware. Did it rain today? Was it cloudy? Was the sun out? How much power did I use today? How much energy consumption did I use? How much can I use? And you have to adjust your behavior accordingly. And I use this example because I think it's very telling. Lived right next to my water catchment. I could see it. I'm right there. My water source is like arm's length distance, which is very different than how most people live. And it still took me time to remember there's no water. And I'd have this knee-jerk reaction to turn on the tap. And I'd be like, there's no water coming out. Right. There's no water coming out again. But that took time. And just that to me was so insightful. I was like, wow, this shit runs deep, right? And most people, we're being told, that we have to be very careful of water consumption and, droughts and flooding and extreme weather patterns, but it's so far away. We live in closed walls. It's like out of sight, out of mind. And over decades of living outside, it has changed my brain. It has fundamentally, I've been shaped by that experience, and therefore my perception of reality is different. It's a relational understanding. When people say, it's like throw the garbage out where? There is no out.
I've had this experience a couple different times on psychedelics, and I think a lot of other people have too, where the first one was in a maloca with ayahuasca. The second one was just in my own bedroom with psilocybin. And I was like, this is the inside of my brain right now. Some kind of, kind of holographic thing where it's like this whole structure that I'm in is somehow literally the inside of my brain. Not sure how that works. But I think about that, and especially, my time in Hawaii, where and just the contrast between like living in four walls and like living in all of these very particular kind of boxes. And, I also think about this idea that like 80% of the information that comes into our brain comes through our visual cortex. And so it's like most of what is being imprinted on us is what we see. And so And I think there's really something that's very subtle about kind of feeling the ceiling above me and the kind of enclosure of that. And I think that's why people love, you know, tall ceilings and high ceilings, just to give some relief of like, oh, it's just an 8 foot ceiling here. I think all that stuff is so fascinating. And then, just imagining, so if that's what we're getting imprinted with day after day, the difference between imagining, forest and sky above me all the time compared to wall, ceiling.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. You're pointing to something really powerful here.
Yeah, and like the idea of like feeling trapped or contained, or like, I mean, I think there's such a balance between like, it can feel really nice to feel contained, but it can also be very kind of entrapping to feel that way. And yeah, I mean, just kind of making connections around a lot of different things. One thing I want to go back to is so you're talking about these different kind of paths of psychedelics where like, and I've kind of broken it into like three very general ones. One is that more like clinical medical model, one is kind of the church model, and then one is this like I'm an adult human and I should have the liberty to do what I want with my consciousness sort of model. And Thank You Life very much exists inside that more clinical medical model. We currently partner with ketamine clinics that are run by doctors, MDs, psychotherapists, and all of this.
And thank you for that work that you do, because I think it's all needed. I think there's a place for all of it.
Thank you. Totally.
I mean, I'm kind of curious too, before we go back to just actually hang out in what we were just talking about. Are you open to that?
Please. Yeah,
Like,
please.
the environmental psychology piece it's such a deep love of mine. And it's, yes, through my studies. Okay, I'm gonna share something here. So
Please.
when we talk about creativity, for example, people are like, okay, well, what are we talking about? It's like this ephemeral concept that can mean a lot of different things. And so one of the things I like to start by is explaining the landscape of creativity. So you have the creative person, the creative process, the creative product, but I think of it as the creative outcome. Like, what is the outcome of the person being in a creative process? And then the fourth P is place, the place that you're in and the environment that you find yourself in. And what you named actually is backed by science and research that tall ceilings help you come up with better ideas than smaller ceilings, short ceilings. And so there's overlap between all of the four Ps. And in graduate school, I actually extended it into this is Mel Rhodes' model of the four Ps. I extended it into the five Ps with creative practices. They all interact. And the person in the place, I mean, now this links to cognitive science, especially if you're into John Vervaeke's work, where this is what a niche is. I am an organism interacting with my environment, and there are environmental affordances that allow me to do things, right? And so I have literally designed my life intentionally to maximize and support human flourishing, the flourishing of my creative channel, which is a foundational aspect of human flourishing. So it's so funny that we need research to validate, but I am immersed in birdsong all day. I wake up to birdsong, the sound of the rain, looking at greenery. It's all of these things are actually imprinting in it. It is the construction. I'm in relationship with that, and it affects my psyche texture. You were talking about, you went into your visual inside your psyche texture. That's a great skill set to have. I try to go there at least once a week inside my brain from a visual perspective, which is a whole other topic of conversation, of the power of your mind and imagination in the healing process. When we align with flourishing, healing happens. When we hyper focus on healing, I think it actually causes more struggle than it does if we just help people become more creative, help people live healthier in a way that feels good, right? And so when I was actually just in Miami not that long ago, and I was staying in this apartment, and one of the things that struck me, because I was there for a few weeks, and so I had a solo journey while I was there. And during that journey, I was like, I miss the frequency of the jungle that I'm immersed in all the time. It doing something to my psyche in every single moment. It's a specific frequency. And when I was in the apartment in Miami, it was like, oh, the sound of the fridge was going on. It was like, these man-made mechanical things, like the air conditioning would turn on and it would just make a noise. And it was just so, and I was like, wow, we are up against so much. The sound of cars all day, the light pollution, no natural rhythm of complete darkness. And so I think that, I like to inspire people to, feel empowered to create their lives in a way that is more life supporting. And this, it doesn't have to be extreme like this, because most people wouldn't be able to hack this reality for 5 minutes, let alone 5 days. The bugs would just be like, drive people away immediately. But there really is something to this. I'm entraining my awareness. My primary relationship is with my environment around me. And I'm in relationship with my environment because I'm looking at it all the time and I'm hearing it all the time. And that is having a profound effect on my cognition and my ability to think, to make decisions, all of it. Everything that I'm able to do in my life.
I did not realize that there was studies about the high ceilings thing.
Yep. And that's where we start getting into creative cognition of unconstrained cognition versus constrained cognition. And that's what psychedelics do. They allow us to go into a very specific form of unconstrained cognition. And when you think about the creative process, getting back to the 4 Ps that I developed into the 5 Ps, the creative process requires divergent and unconstrained, and it also requires convergent and constrained. So sometimes, depending on the task and where you're at in the creative process, and this could be for anything, everyone's engaged in a creative process all the time. So it's not like creativity is for, the select few geniuses who are painters or, we're all in the creative process all the time. Sometimes it's really good to go sit in that smaller space because it constrains your focus and it allows you to get focused on the task that needs to get done. In between that, you might want to go for a walk. There's attention restoration theory. Open your attention allows you to open your visual field of awareness. How you pay attention with your eyes affects your nervous system. It affects your sympathetic versus your parasympathetic nervous system. It influences your ability. It influences your idea space, your space of possibility. And so that's why we get our best ideas when we're walking, when we're in nature, when we're mind wandering. There's really a lot of studies to show the benefits of mind wandering, even though there's a lot of confusion around that. But understanding
you said attention restoration while walking. Will you speak to that a little bit and what that is?
Attention restoration theory, which is really just all very simple. It's really just all intuitive that when you are doing anything of cognitive strain, of increased focus, and we optimally are in 90-minute cycles. So, taking breaks for just 10 minutes, 15 minutes to go outside and look at nature, because there is a dynamic pattern in nature that helps to restore your attentional faculties. And it's all just, of course it does that. Of course, nature is the thing that's going to reset us, right? Of course it is. And so, but more additionally, it's really important to understand that active rest is an incredibly important part of your creative process, and that doing all the time is a very unproductive way to manage and structure your days. So I'm more of an advocate. I've developed a system called the 50-50 8-hour workday. And that is a different model. I know a lot of people are like the 4-hour workday, but I like to think of it as the 50-50 8-hour. So it's deep work. I love Cal Newport's theory on deep work. I don't know if you're familiar with his writing, but he's, it's undisturbed, deep work focus. It's the work that I do that moves the needle, where I am not just in the shallow answering emails, and we're in all of those task switching shallow cognitive tasks all the time. Deep work is undisturbed. It allows you to go deep. It's the work that really contributes to your legacy work, is how I think about it. But then you also need to be disciplined about active rest and allowing your mind to integrate that deep work session and think about the work that you're doing while you're moving your body, while you're outside in nature, because that's where all the dots get connected, right? And then if you really wanted to take it a step further, you could integrate psychedelics into that creative process, depending on how long you've been working with medicines. And this is something actually that I always like to remind people, because I think we don't think about this in that way. Altered states of consciousness and psychedelic terrain, or plant medicine terrain, if you work with ayahuasca and you've been working with this medicine a long time, there's like ayahuasca realms that get open to you. Those take practice to learn how to become more proficient in navigating those terrain. Okay? So think about it. Oftentimes you see people first time in medicine ceremony and they're disoriented. There's a deep initial psyche restructuring happening. There's confusion. People don't know how to sit up. They don't know which way's up. They need help getting to the bathroom. If that person keeps showing up, soon they're able to sit up straight. Soon they're able to start singing some of the songs that they hear. And then maybe, within 4 or 5 months, if they've been showing up, they start picking up the guitar and they're able to start playing songs. There's a reason for that, because those skill sets are the psychedelic state is a skill set to navigate. Okay. And I like using the music example because we can see someone making progress with a musical instrument like guitar, for example. You can see them making progress. Now, apply that is one form of creativity, but there are other forms of creativity that happen in your idea space, in your mind. And so you can also learn skill sets to become more creative in other ways that perhaps other people can't see, but that's an internal process for you. And that's the kind of preparation that I'm talking about when I'm talking about a whole new understanding of set and setting, preparation and integration under a different frame, because anything is possible in those spaces. And over years, like now, it's like I can go really deep, but I'm still functional. Like I'm still able to function. I'm able to like go outside and, do the thing and whatever it is.
Take care of yourself. Yeah.
Take care of myself. And of course, there's like an arc of my journeys, and my arc is very similar now over and over and over again. It's pretty much the same arc, but I map my creative process onto that arc.
Wow. I feel like you're really kind of leading the way in terms of showing what is possible with these things. Yeah. So it's so fascinating. I feel like it's an interesting reflection for me, because I feel like my work is still so kind of hyper focused on some of the things we were talking about before, like, helping others heal from like very kind of particular things. And I'm curious how, like, what you would say to someone who might be like, wow, this sounds great. And like, I do live in a box, can barely pay for that box, don't know how I'm going to get out of it. Maybe I'm live in a place where there's like a fairly harsh winter, and I imagine that somebody could just feel so many different constraints in all of this, on top of having like current mental health things that feel too heavy for them to like, manage or navigate themselves.
Yeah.
I could imagine someone in that kind of space just being like, all of this feels too far to touch or grasp. And I'm curious if you could just like kind of bridge the gap there and speak to how somebody in a more difficult current container might just start some of this.
Yeah, I have a lot of compassion and empathy for that, because I was there too.
Yeah,
totally. And look, it's what's possible, right? This is just what I've tapped into, one step at a time, one day at a time. But when it's
or just to interject again, it really reminds me of the idea of compounding interest. It's like, this is what you built out over 20 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, step by step.
Yeah. And I love that you name this, because honestly, I think that one of the most dangerous expectations, and I'm all for miracles, and I have watched radical transformations in one night. I've been present to much of that. I've seen a lot of that. And at the end of the day, integration is literally synonymous with learning. And learning is the pruning apart of synaptic connections and the formation of new connections. There's no bypassing that. And that moves at the process of nature, at the pace of nature. Your brain is nature. And when we try, it's like the roots in the ground. You cannot force a root to grow faster. Sure, we can microdose. We get a little BDNF, a little brain stimulation, where a little miracle grow on the roots. But even if you keep putting miracle grow on roots, actually, you're going to get more dysfunction in the end if you try to do anything. But what can you do to help the plant grow is you can put it in the right soil, tend to that soil, tend to it every day, make sure it gets light, make sure it gets water, make sure it gets the right nutrients, it's getting clean air, and you're in relationship with that plant. It's really the same thing for the brain. And I think one of the dangerous things in the space is this expectation of how quickly things will transpire. I am still working on things that I've struggled with at 15. That's just reality. That's truth. And that would be like, yeah, I mean, I've taken quantum leaps. I've come an extremely long way, but there's still stuff that I'm tending to and that I probably will, because that childhood imprinting, whatever happens in the first 7, 8, 9 years of your life, that's what life is. Our entire adulthood, we're really just unpacking and making sense of the first imprintings of our lives. Some of us have really more intense imprintings than others, but no one is unscathed from any kind of family trauma, drama, whatever. There's definitely a spectrum, but everyone is pretty much figuring out, how do I heal anything that wasn't serving me as a child? And so I am very much like, my program, the first thing I tell people is, when you're moving at the pace of neural plasticity, this takes a different pace. But when you learn the skill sets, part of the program is actually teaching people accelerated learning techniques, how to learn. When I went back to graduate school and I was 37 at the time, I had to teach myself how to learn again. And that was a really valuable lesson for me. But integration is synonymous with learning. That's what integration is. And framing it that way actually changes how we think about integration in and of itself. And so to answer your question, it's like, for me, I did just take one step at a time. I did just and I made decisions also from a place of, I absolutely can't live like this anymore. And we all have to find what truth is for each of us. But if I can equip somebody, and this is why even for people who are newer to the path, Transilience is a powerful training program, even if you're not supporting other people, because I'm teaching the neuroscience of perception, nervous system regulation, attunement, nervous system attunement, and teaching people the foundational skills so that you're actually moving in the right direction. And instead of trying to look at, this very small part of your life, it's like you go to the hospital and you say you have kidney failure, and then they send you into this one place, but it's like, it's so compartmentalized. If you put someone in a community that is connected with nature, that is actually solving the larger issues of what people are struggling with, healing happens naturally. It's like trying to focus on losing weight versus actually really just feeling good and eating healthy foods. Weight loss is a byproduct of that. And that's how I think about healing. And even though, my program is not specifically focused on healing trauma, even though it is a trauma-informed training, or really healing addiction. I'm very well versed. I wrote a book on addiction. It happens as a natural byproduct of actually these deeper questions. And the part of the reason that we go for these other things, well, I want to, sell the quick fix, actually helping someone realign with meaning is a much more in-depth process. And it actually requires a lot more in-depth skills to do that, to help someone go through a liminal space through a journey and actually reintegrate and tell a new story about who they are and what they're capable of. That shit takes time. There is no bypassing that. And if anyone thinks that they're going to bypass that process, they're just going to keep going back to the medicines without getting the message.
Reminds me of that meme of some like scary monster following somebody and it says like integration, and then they're like, maybe I'll just do more medicine.
Right. I love those memes, right? Uh-huh.
I love what you're talking about with learning, and it reminds me of my experience in grad school. And I did a counseling program, and since then, a lot of people have done like hybrid programs where they're not in, with their cohort kind of learning. And I've never been quite able to articulate it like you put it, but it just seemed to me like there was something about my time in grad school. And so I also had a unique situation where they did a spring cohort. So I started in the spring and did 2.5 years instead of 3 years. And so, the second half of my, year one was in this very quick 6-week summer semester instead of 16 weeks. And by the time we started year two, it felt like there was a difference between us and the people who had a 16-week second semester. And a lot of what I was thinking about is just like, yeah, I just, my system just wants time to like sit in this space of like, I'm a psychotherapist. I'm becoming a psychotherapist. I'm learning these different things. I'm learning about attunement. And so, I mean, just the idea of, spending 6 weeks trying to sit in attunement and figure out what that is compared to 16. It's like, yeah, one's gonna be better. I love looking at that sort of long path. And, I also love the sort of plant analogy. And yeah, it's like, there's things that we can do to optimize the plant growth, but it's not infinite. There's a certain amount of miracle grow before it becomes destructive. And, I think of like something like weight training too. It's, same thing. There's an optimal amount of lifting before it's too much of a breakdown for the muscles and we're not growing as fast as we could. There's, if we're doing it every day and not having enough rest time, not getting enough good sleep. So it's like this whole kind of package of like the right food, sleep, and the right amount of training in the right ways. And that kind of is what optimizes it. Very similar to, trying to, help a plant grow. And yeah, I just love that as an analogy for the same thing as the brain, and to like look at a sort of like mental health idea of who I am and how I feel as like that kind of thing. It's like, okay, bit by bit, I'm helping my kind of reorganize my psyche, and I'm helping to reorganize and restructure my brain. And, if there's like something like the amount of synapse connections in our brain that's like on the level of how many atoms there are in the universe, something like that. People can fact check me on what the exact number is. But if if you're going to restructure something that has that many connections, like, yeah, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in a year. It really is like takes time to, piece things apart and back together. And yeah.
Yep. We don't come with an operating manual, right? And so when you think about that, it's like, and most parents aren't teaching their children optimized functioning, right? And that's, for me, what I think of Transilience as like a codex for human flourishing that ranges from embodied cognition to creative cognition to understanding anatomy and physiology and neuroscience. And actually, Tibetan Buddhism just points to all the same thing. Everything that science points to, so much of what Eastern philosophy, it's like, we're just, it's like what I said earlier. It's like, we don't need science to say, oh, when you listen to a birdsong for 6 minutes, it activates your parasympathetic nervous system. But right now we're so disconnected that we do need that,
Yeah.
we do need that. but it's all very simple and yet advanced at the same time, And the foundation is simple, and yet there are advanced teachings. A big part of what I teach people is understanding the neuroscience of perception will change your life. When you understand how perception works, and you work with medicines to train your mind to pay attention in a different way, and you can learn these principles of environmental psychology and how niche construction works, which is a big part of 4E cognition, how what's in my environment shapes who I am and offers me affordances that allow me to do different things, right? Experience different things, then a lot more is possible. A lot more is possible. Emotional mastery, I'll add that in there. When we understand, especially Lisa Feldman Barrett, she's been a huge influence on my work as well. And understanding, we dive really deep into predictive coding and the Bayesian brain model and understanding how we construct reality and how we keep perpetuating it based on the past. All of that I teach and people get it. But the whole point and the work that I do with people is to take these understandings and go sit with the medicine, with it, with what we're learning, so that they start encoding it and imprinting it into their nervous system on an experiential level, right? Because it's like one thing when you're like, I know I need to drink more water, but then you sit with ayahuasca and she whispers into your ear, you need to drink more water. And you're just like, okay, I get it. And you understand it on a different level, it is like advanced kindergarten in that way.
Yeah, I think so many people's psychedelic experiences really give them that that more experientially felt whatever the learning might be. Again, could be about their past, or could be a moment of that more kind of like nervous system regulation, or feeling really good.
And that takes time too. I journeyed with medicines for 20 years before in one ayahuasca ceremony, I knew that something happened in my mom's pregnancy with me. And I called her the next morning and I was like, Mom, tell me, something happened. What happened? And she just started crying. And I am super tight with my mom. And she told me like the full birth story, and she had already had 3 kids and she wanted to have an abortion, and she went to the clinic. She had an appointment and she was in the chair and she was about to abort me. And then she left. The doctor came in and she just got up and walked out and was like, I have to give this child a chance. But there was so much like the energetic imprinting of that experience, and also the matrix of what I was born into, the family constellation I was born into, was really intense imprinting for me. And my whole life has been healing these places of belonging. I belong here. I'm meant to be here. And that took 20 years to come through. So there's deeper layers, that happen, and we just stay open and stay curious and allow ourselves to receive what we're meant to receive, and take the instructions and follow those instructions till the next journey, right? But implement those changes, those whispers of truth from even your first journey, so that you are making those steps in alignment, because these medicines are tuning us into a different dimension of reality, right? And these medicines are plugged into a Gaian matrix or a bio matrix that they're already tapped in. They know what's going on. And when we tap into that, that's life-giving. It's giving us information about where we're out of alignment, what we need to do to actually flourish and be in right relationship with the energy of life. And that's why, I like the Dennis McKenna quote saying that they're the neurotransmitters of the Gaian mind, telling us to wake up. And every journey is valuable in what we receive. Sometimes it's the contrast of, I do not like the way that person holds ceremony. It does not resonate with me, and I will not sit with that person ever again. That's valuable information, So maybe something didn't come through that was healing or revolutionary, but it informs resonance. And these medicines are teaching us how to attune to truth. So to go back to your question earlier about what is that person who's in a box, who's struggling to pay rent? It's about slowing down and listening deeply. And sometimes it's as simple and profound as taking one step towards aliveness, to that which makes you come more alive, and actually starting to attune your body to aliveness. I think about it as my relationship to the spirit of inspiration. That's the primary relationship that I tend to in this life.
I love that as a great like orienting piece for people. And yeah, and for those who might ask, what does that mean to like attune to aliveness? I would just suggest start with that question. What makes me feel alive? What makes me feel more alive? And how can I bring that in just a little bit more and start to build that out?
Yeah. And that's why a big part of the training is interoceptive awareness. So what actually starting, and this is why I'm like, it's a codex for embodied flourishing, for actually just a manual for functioning, right? So it's like paying attention when your stomach is growling because you're hungry and you're suppressing it because you're trying to meet a deadline or whatever it is, starting to be more attuned to your body signals. We're so disconnected, and that's why we're perpetuating more disconnection. And that's why I'm such an advocate for the work that I'm doing, because it's really about relational healing. It's bringing, bridging the divide. And we even have a divide between body and mind, even in the spiritual communities that perpetuate that. God, you're so in your head. You're really overthinking it. This is the era of embodiment. And it's like, actually, no, you should actually read more and refine your intellect so that you can make more discerning choices for your life. It's about alignment. Cognition is a full body experience. Your brain is your body. It is your nervous system. It's all the way to your tips of your fingers. And the more that we actually learn how to move in alignment with a full body experience and stop perpetuating these spiritual memes of separation and disconnection, then the more we move closer to actually learning how to inhabit this earth in a way that supports life. And if we don't start doing that soon, we're going to have much bigger problems to talk about.
I just did a little like math in my mind, and it was like, if we are nature and our brains are nature, and if we're disconnected from nature, then we are disconnected from ourselves.
Yeah,
which is what you've been saying.
That's exactly it. A little synapse just fired in your brain. But that's the kind of connections. And actually, psychedelics enhance connectivity in those ways. We're able to make novel connections during those. So we just try to prime our brains for that, prime the brain to see more connection. And that's why being in natural environments is really helpful, It's so funny. Like, I just submitted a panel for Psychedelic Science 2025, and like nature wasn't even one of the freaking options on the category list, And I'm just like, wow, we're so screwed as a movement if we don't start getting it. Really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I see so much, I feel like, and it makes sense to me why, but yes, so much of what we're trying to do is kind of insert ourselves into what's there at the moment. And yeah, what's there in the moment is not very attuned or paying much attention to nature at all.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for being a stand for that piece. And yeah, I think this is a good place to pause, unless there's anything else that you want to say as some closing thoughts.
I love Thank You Life. What a great name. It's very similar to Dear Humanity, I was thinking about that. I was like, it's really just like in honor of life. And I think that is just like encouraging people to zoom out and not get so fixated on the compounds. They're cool, don't get me wrong, but like how much more can we talk about the 5-AT2H receptor without actually talking about what the fuck we do with that information? So, it's like, zoom out, see the bigger picture. And I think that's the most important conversation that we can be having right now.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. So this will be coming out, I think, like the 10th or the 17th of January. You have Transilience. When does that launch? The 24th?
20th.
Cool. So yeah, where can people find you with that specifically?
Yeah, lauradon.co/Transilience.
Cool. So everybody, please go check that out, and yeah, sign up if you feel called to go do this work with her. Thank you so much for taking the time today, Laura.
Thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in to the Thank You Life podcast. If you would like to get involved with our mission and help more people in need access ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, please consider becoming a monthly supporter. Donations are the sole means through which we provide financial assistance to our beneficiaries, and we currently have close to 1,000 people in need on our waitlist. This work could not happen without our generous supporters, so if you've been touched by hearing these stories of healing and want to make an impact, please consider visiting our website, thankyoulife.org, and becoming a monthly supporter.